The number one lesson, and I think everybody says to me, why are you the way you are? I wake up at 4:30 a.m. every morning. And
Me too.
Yay, boom.
4:30
I was
in the
the
house.
5 o'clock,
I was
club.
too.
Now I'm at the 4 a.m. club.
I'm 5:30 club.
I
Don't
went
you
down-
love it?
It's kind of it's actually
life-changing.
That little 30 minutes
it's
from
the best.
from 5 to 4:30.
Yeah. It's like an extra little,
That extra 30 minutes.
It's a buzz. It's like, it's amazing, right?
People think
try it.
people think we're crazy. I know
People
that.
do think we're crazy. It's funny because I post on my stories. I'm like, it's 3:30. Good morning. People are like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Go back to bed.
Rise and grind. Let's go.
I'm like, rise and grind. It's a beautiful day. But going back to your question of how did that shape me, I think a lot of people go, why are you always so positive? Why are you always so happy? Why are you always so gung-ho? Why are you always going? And I think growing up in that environment, number one, shaped me to really appreciate life. Because I feel when everything is going so good in your life, like for my children, they don't appreciate things the way I appreciate things. So when I wake up at 4:30 and I'm like waiting for that sunrise to wake up, I'm like, oh my God, it's like I'm enjoying my coffee. I'm enjoying
No
the sunrise.
bombs.
No bombs. And back then, back home at the time, the government would shut off the electricity. So imagine you have bombs falling on you, you have no electricity. I would have to either light a candle or hold like a lantern and run into the shelter. And on top of that, we had to study on candle lights and get up the next day. And if there was no bombs, we would go to school and take our exams. And you're in a dungeon on cement floors, on a mattress, doing homework. And so it makes you appreciate life. That's number one. Number two, it makes you adapt. I mean, coming here and moving at such a young age at 14, and I spoke fluent Arabic and French, and I knew barely any English. So having to all of a sudden in one night leave your country, leave your friends, leave your school, leave your cousins, your family, everybody, the country that you grew up in, come to a different country, and all of a sudden you're like, at 14, go to college. I skipped high school, 4 years of high school, went to college. I barely spoke English. And have to make new friends, learn a new language, learn a new culture. And then my parents went back because my dad was a politician. And so he, had to go back and like, he had businesses. He goes, I can't stay here. So imagine that. So it makes you adapt. And I think it made me really not just learn how to just, evolve or just be, but it made me also learn how to thrive.
Well, we see this a lot. Actually, I went to Tony Robbins' conference, and he was talking about, he was saying that good times create weak people. Weak people create hard times.
Yes.
And hard times create strong people. Strong people create great times, and it just goes in a cycle. It just goes around and around. So it sounds like you went through the hard times, and it created strong
100%.
person.
I think it makes you who you are. And I think a lot of times now I look at my kids and how they panic when something tiny happens. Like I said,
so are you creating some weak kids?
I don't know. Sometimes I wonder. I'm like, I look at them. Let me give you an example. During COVID, when COVID hit, I mean, we live in Orange County. It's like, you're in a bubble and like the perfect place. The sun is shining. And we were in the house for about when the whole shutdown happened. I'm a dentist. I couldn't work on my patients, so I had to close my office. And I didn't know what to do with myself because I'm always running around and I'm working and I'm doing this. And so I became this like chef, like a really huge chef. And I started cooking these big meals at home. And every morning I would have like, breakfast ready for the kids, lunch and dinner. And they were just the whole time complaining. Oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. When is this going to end? And at that time, they were 11 and I believe 9. And I hadn't told them my story because I didn't want them to like feel anxious or have anxiety or anything like that. And I said, one of these days, I'm going to tell, when they're older, I'll tell them what mommy went through. I told them very little about the war. And I said, I grew up in a war and I moved here when I was 14 and that's all they knew. And I remember like working my butt off at the stove and I'm making this like gourmet lunch and I put it in front of them. I'm like, here's your lunch. What do you want for dinner? And they both looked at me and they were like, this is awful. And mind you, we bought them electric scooters, electric bikes. They were outside playing like all sorts of board games. They had everything. Okay. They just couldn't like sometimes hang out with their friends. And I turned around and I had lost it. I literally lost it on my kids. And I turned around and I just went up to the other counter and I go, sit down, both of you. And they were like, what's going on? I'm like, I need to tell you a story. And I sat them down and I told them what happened. I said, you guys have electricity, you have food, you have a house over your head, you live in Orange County, which is a bubble, you have everything that you need, you're fully safe, and you have a mom that's sitting here and like making you these gourmet meals and buying you stuff and taking you everywhere. What are you guys complaining about? What is there to complain about? And I was like, do you understand what I went through as a child from the day I was born until I was 14 years old? And they were like both looking at me like, what is up with this lady?
Did it still not register?
Oh, I did. And I sat him down that day and I was waiting a couple more years. I was like, I'm going to wait a little bit more until they get older to tell them the story. But at that point I had lost it because it was 2 weeks at home and they were just nothing but complaining. And I just said to them, and I said, this is what I went through. I said, imagine right now you're underground in the dark on a candlelight studying, and you have to get up the next day and go to school and take a test.
Yeah.
And there's no you push the electrical switch and there's no electricity. And you have no hot water because there's no electricity. So you have to boil water to take a shower. And I said, imagine that. Imagine going through that. And so I told them the whole story. And at that point, they were just both like, their jaw was just open. And they were looking at me like, oh my God, Mom, like we had no idea. Yeah. And I said, thank God for everything you had. First of all, thank God that you are actually like alive, that you wake up in the morning and your lungs are working and your heart is working and your arms and you have your arms and limbs. Because I said, at your age, I would go to bed and just pray and pray and pray and pray for my limbs to be intact the next day. Like that's what I prayed for as a child. I'm like, don't send a bomb on me and I would lose my limbs because I've had friends that it happened to.
Yeah.
And so that was my biggest fear growing up. And I said, I don't want to be sitting in a handicap with like no limbs and no arms. And because of things you see on TV all the time during the war and things that happen to your friends and family. And, and at that point, I think they kind of got it and they were like, wow, we had no idea what you had gone through.